There was a time when wealth demanded spectacle, when power needed to be seen from miles away, carved into stone and stretched across acres of manicured gardens. The Palace of Versailles stands today as perhaps the most perfect monument to that age, a building so extravagant that its very existence helped topple a kingdom. Yet today's billionaires, with fortunes that dwarf those of any French king, build homes that whisper rather than shout. This transformation reveals something profound about how wealth, power, and society itself have fundamentally changed. To understand why billionaires stopped building palaces, we must first understand what Versailles truly represented. When Louis XIV transformed his father's modest hunting lodge into the most spectacular palace Europe had ever seen, he wasn't simply building a home. He was constructing a tool of political control, a statement of absolute power, made manifest in marble and gold. The numbers alone stagger the imagination. Over 60 years of construction consumed somewhere between $2 and $3 billion in today's currency, though some estimates push even higher. More than 30,000 workers labored on the project, many dying from malaria contracted in the swampy grounds. The palace eventually sprawled across 700 rooms, with 1,200 fireplaces and more than 700,000 square feet of space, but the true cost was measured differently. During Louis XIV's reign, approximately 25% of France's tax revenues flowed into Versailles. By the time Louis XVI occupied the throne, that figure had ballooned to 40%. The French peasantry, already crushed by taxation, watched as the wealth of an entire nation poured into gilding ceilings and maintaining fountains. The Hall of Mirrors alone, that iconic gallery of reflected light and opulence, became a symbol not of majesty, but of grotesque excess. Louis XIV understood perfectly what he was building. He famously declared himself the Sun King, and meant for Versailles to function as the sun around which all of France would orbit. He forced his nobility to abandon their provincial power bases and take up residence at court, where he could watch them, control them, and ensure they could never challenge his authority. The palace was designed to impress, to intimidate, and to demonstrate that the king's power was total, unchallengeable, and divinely ordained. Every room whispered the same message to every visitor who walked through its doors: "The king is everything. You are nothing." This worked for a time. But on the morning of October 6, 1789, an angry mob of Parisian women marched to Versailles demanding bread. They killed several of the king's guards, mounted their severed heads on pikes, and forced the royal family back to Paris. 4 years later, Louis XVI lost his head to the guillotine. Versailles had become a liability, a physical manifestation of everything the revolution sought to destroy. The palace that was meant to demonstrate eternal power had instead demonstrated the fragility of unchecked excess. The lesson was not immediately learned. Throughout the 19th century and into the 20th, the newly rich of America's Gilded Age tried to recreate Versailles on their own shores. The Vanderbilts, the Astors, the Carnegies, these industrial titans accumulated fortunes through railroads, steel, and oil during an era that lacked both government regulation and personal income tax. They saw themselves as American aristocracy and sought to build homes that matched those of European nobility. The results were staggering. The breakers, built by Cornelius Vanderbilt II in Newport, cost $7 million in 1895, equivalent to over $200 million today. This palace of 70 rooms, 33 reserved for servants, was used for perhaps a few weeks each summer. The family would arrive, occupy this monument to wealth for a brief season, then abandon it until the following year. Along Fifth Avenue in New York, between 78th and 79th Streets, a parade of mansions rose like small palaces. The Isaac Fletcher Mansion, 2 Stanford White designed houses for the Payne family, the James B. Duke residence. These buildings cost fortunes to construct and fortunes more to maintain. Yet within a single generation, they began to crumble. The heirs of these industrial magnates found themselves unable or unwilling to maintain such extravagance. The Linnywood Hall, built between 1897 and 1900 for Peter Errol Brown Widener, exemplified this trajectory. With 110 rooms, 55 bedrooms, 20 bathrooms, an art gallery, and a ballroom that could host 1,000 guests, the mansion required 37 full-time staff just to run it, and another 60 to maintain the gardens. When Widener died in 1915, the house passed to his youngest son. After his death, it sat largely abandoned, starting in 1943, slowly decaying, its priceless art collection sold off piece by piece. The transformation of wealth display accelerated dramatically after the Second World War. Several forces converged to make the palace model not just impractical, but actively dangerous for the wealthy. The first, and perhaps most obvious, was taxation. The introduction of progressive income taxes, estate taxes, and property taxes meant that maintaining a palace became ruinously expensive. Where Louis XIV could divert half the national budget to his residence, modern billionaires faced tax authorities who would very much like to know about every marble column and gold leaf ceiling. The visible display of wealth became a liability, attracting not admiration but scrutiny from tax collectors, journalists, and an increasingly skeptical public. The second shift was social and philosophical. The 20th century watched the Russian Revolution execute the Romanovs in their palace basement, saw the rise of communism across half the globe, and witnessed decolonization movements challenge the very concept of hereditary privilege. Building a Versailles, in this context, wasn't merely expensive or impractical, it was ideologically dangerous. It announced to the world that you believed yourself fundamentally superior, deserving of a palace, while others struggled. The palace model required not just wealth, but a social order that accepted vast inequality as natural and proper. That social order was dying. If you enjoy this deep dive into how the ultra-wealthy live, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We'll be exploring more fascinating stories about money, power, and the hidden world of extreme wealth. The security considerations cannot be overstated. A palace announces itself. It sits visible from miles away, a target for anyone with grievances. In an age of terrorism, kidnapping for ransom, and social unrest, the wealthy increasingly see visibility as vulnerability. Modern billionaires employ private security firms that specialize not in gilded gates and grand entrances, but in anonymity and discretion. They use offshore trusts, shell corporations, and legal structures so complex that determining who actually owns a property becomes nearly impossible. The goal is not to be unknown, that's often unavoidable for tech founders or corporate moguls, but to make it impossible to know where they are at any given moment. This leads directly to the third major change, how billionaires actually use their homes. Louis XIV lived at Versailles. He held court there, governed from there, died there. The palace was his primary residence and the center of French political life for decades. Modern billionaires rarely have a primary residence in any meaningful sense. They maintain multiple properties scattered across continents, moving between them based on business needs, tax strategies, seasonal preferences, and security concerns. Jeff Bezos owns homes in Beverly Hills, Washington, D.C., New York, Texas, and Hawaii. The Beverly Hills property alone, the Warner estate, cost $165 million. But calling any of these his home misses the point. They're nodes in a network, places to touch down briefly before moving on. This pattern reflects both practical and psychological needs. Multiple residences make surveillance difficult. They provide tax advantages through residency rules in different jurisdictions. They offer lifestyle flexibility, a beach house for relaxation, a city apartment for business, a mountain retreat for privacy. But they also serve a deeper function. For the ultra-wealthy, maintaining multiple homes creates a bubble of privacy through abundance. If you own homes in 5 countries, the media cannot camp outside your door because they don't know which door you're behind. Your movements become unpredictable, making both security and privacy easier to maintain. The architecture of modern wealth reflects these priorities. Consider Mark Zuckerberg's Palo Alto compound. It spans 20,000 square feet across 5 separate houses arranged around a central courtyard, with 15 bedrooms total. The estate is a smart home showcasing cutting-edge technology, reportedly featuring an artificial intelligence assistant voiced by Morgan Freeman. Yet from the street, it's nearly invisible, hidden behind walls and greenery. The design prioritizes functionality and privacy over grandeur. There are no soaring facades to impress passers-by, no gilt gates announcing the owner's importance. The wealth is there, certainly, in the price tag of $37 million and the advanced technology embedded throughout. But it's discreet wealth that doesn't need to announce itself. Larry Ellison, founder of Oracle, takes this philosophy to its logical extreme. Rather than building a single statement property, he's assembled a billion-dollar real estate portfolio, spread across multiple states and countries. In Malibu alone, he owns several mansions, including a $48 million oceanfront estate with its own tennis resort. He purchased most of the Hawaiian island of Lanai and has lived there since 2020. He owns Château du Marais outside Paris, known as Petit Versailles, an 18th century palace built in pure Louis XVI style. Yet he also owns Casa degli Atellani in Milan, the 15th century palace where Leonardo da Vinci stayed while painting The Last Supper. The pattern reveals itself. Where historic wealth built a single monumental palace, modern wealth builds a portfolio. Where Louis needed Versailles to demonstrate his supremacy over other nobles who might challenge him, Ellison has no nobles to impress or intimidate. His competitors aren't feudal lords plotting rebellion, but other technology companies whose CEOs similarly own vast property portfolios. The competition isn't about who can build the biggest palace, but who can assemble the most diverse and strategically useful collection of properties while maintaining the lowest possible profile. The psychology of contemporary billionaires differs fundamentally from that of historic monarchs and Gilded Age industrialists. Men like Louis XIV or Cornelius Vanderbilt operated in societies where visible displays of wealth were expected, even required, to maintain social position. Their identities were inseparable from their public grandeur. They wanted everyone to know they were wealthy and powerful because that knowledge reinforced their authority. Modern billionaires, particularly in technology and finance, often come from middle-class backgrounds and rose through innovation rather than inheritance. Many explicitly reject the aristocratic model, at least publicly. They present themselves as regular people who happen to be good at building companies, not as a separate class entitled to palaces. This doesn't mean they live modestly by any normal standard. It means their wealth displays are coded differently. Instead of marble columns and gold leaf, they invest in privacy technology, encrypted communications, anonymous property ownership through offshore trusts, and security teams trained in counter-surveillance. These things are just as expensive as gilding a ceiling, but they're invisible to everyone except other members of the ultra-wealthy class. The competition has moved inward, from public spectacle to private sophistication. The role of media and public opinion accelerated this shift dramatically. In the age of social media, any display of extreme wealth can be photographed, shared globally within minutes, and become a public relations disaster. When billionaires do build ostentatious properties, they often face immediate backlash. Consider Burj Al Babas in Turkey, an abandoned luxury development of 587 unfinished fantasy castles built as holiday homes for wealthy buyers. The project became a symbol of excess and poor judgment, its Gothic-style towers sitting empty and unfinished, a monument to hubris rather than success. Modern billionaires learned from such examples that visibility breeds criticism. The ultra-wealthy increasingly spend fortunes not on visible palaces, but on invisible infrastructure. Private jet terminals, where they can avoid airports entirely, members-only restaurants with hidden dining rooms and no public signage, hotels with private entrances and no lobby check-ins so they never have to be seen by other guests. Personal security details that include not just bodyguards but cybersecurity experts, reputation management firms, and private investigators. These services cost as much as building a palace, but they leave no marble monument for critics to photograph and protesters to target. Tax havens and legal structures play crucial roles in this new architecture of wealth. Where kings collected taxes to build palaces, modern billionaires structure their affairs to minimize tax exposure. They use foundations and trusts, not primarily for philanthropy but for tax efficiency and asset protection. They establish residency in low-tax jurisdictions, maintain citizenship in countries with favorable inheritance laws, and employ armies of lawyers and accountants whose sole job is to make the true scope of their wealth as opaque as possible. This infrastructure is expensive and complex, but it's far less visible than a palace and far more effective at protecting wealth across generations. The numbers tell the story. Global billionaire wealth doubled from $6.3 trillion to $14 trillion in a single decade. During that same period, the effective tax rates paid by billionaires often fell below those paid by middle-class workers. This wasn't achieved by building palaces, but by building something far more sophisticated, a global financial architecture that allows wealth to move across borders, hide in shell companies, and avoid taxation through perfectly legal mechanisms that most people couldn't begin to understand. This is the modern equivalent of Versailles, not a building but a system. The wealthy also learned from history's harsh lessons about revolution. Louis XVI died because Versailles made the gap between rich and poor impossible to ignore. The palace was a constant visible reminder that the aristocracy consumed the nation's wealth while peasants starved. Modern billionaires understand that maintaining extreme wealth requires some level of social acceptance, or at least public indifference. Building palaces risks provoking the kind of resentment that leads to political action, higher taxes, or worse. Better to be rich quietly than to paint a target on your own back. This strategy of invisible wealth extends to philanthropy. Many billionaires now channel significant portions of their wealth through foundations that bear their names but serve to soften their public image. These foundations do genuine good in many cases, funding disease research, education, and poverty alleviation. But they also function as a form of social insurance, buying goodwill and deflecting criticism. It's harder to protest outside someone's home when that person just donated $100 million to cure malaria. This represents a sophisticated understanding that in a democratic age, wealth must justify itself through utility, not lineage or divine right. The technological capabilities available to modern wealth also change the equation. A palace required thousands of workers and decades of construction. Today's billionaires can achieve equal or greater comfort through technology rather than size. Smart home systems, climate control, entertainment systems, and security infrastructure can make a 20,000 square foot compound more luxurious than a 200-room palace that requires hundreds of servants to operate. Why build Versailles when you can have a relatively modest mansion that nonetheless contains every possible amenity, controlled by artificial intelligence, and secured by technology that would seem like magic to Louis XIV? Consider also how work itself has changed. Kings and aristocrats didn't work in the modern sense. They held court, governed, and entertained, activities that required grand physical spaces. Modern billionaires, even those in traditional industries, are global business operators whose work happens largely through telecommunications. They attend board meetings via video conference, trade stocks through computers, and manage empires from laptops. Elon Musk famously claimed to sleep on a couch at Tesla's factory rather than maintain an elaborate home. Whether true or just effective branding, the claim reflects a real shift in how wealth conceives of itself. The modern billionaire doesn't need a throne room because they carry their empire in their pocket. The few exceptions that prove the rule are illuminating. When billionaires do build large showpiece properties, they tend to do so in ways that avoid the palace model. Bill Gates' Xanadu 2.0, a massive complex in Washington state, was designed to look like a lodge rather than a palace, nestled into the landscape rather than dominating it. The name itself, a reference to the poem Kubla Khan about the palace of the Mongol emperor, is ironic rather than aspirational. The house contains cutting-edge technology and cost over $100 million, but its design specifically avoided the appearance of palace-like grandeur, even as it incorporated palace-level expense. When contemporary super-rich individuals do attempt palace construction, the projects often meet with failure or abandonment. The phenomenon of mega mansions sitting unfinished or unsold has become common enough to spawn entire genres of architecture criticism and abandoned property exploration. These failures happen not because the builders lack money, but because the market for such properties is vanishingly small. Who wants to buy a palace in an age when doing so makes you a target for criticism, taxation, and possibly violence? The resale value of extreme showpieces has proven poor precisely because the things that made palaces valuable to historical aristocrats, visibility, grandeur, the ability to overawe visitors, have become liabilities. The shift away from palaces also reflects changing concepts of luxury itself. For historical aristocrats, luxury meant possession of rare physical objects and spaces. The ability to fill rooms with gold, commission art from master painters, plant gardens that required armies of workers to maintain, these were luxury. Modern luxury increasingly means freedom, mobility, and control over one's time and attention. The wealthiest individuals prize the ability to be anywhere while being unreachable by anyone they don't wish to speak with. They value privacy over grandeur, flexibility over permanence. A palace ties you to one location. A portfolio of discrete properties scattered globally offers the ultimate luxury of choice. Security concerns have evolved in ways that make palaces actively dangerous. Historical security meant thick walls and guards with weapons. Modern threats are more sophisticated. Cyber attacks, identity theft, sophisticated scams targeting the wealthy, politically motivated violence. These require different defenses. The modern equivalent of palace walls isn't stone but encryption. The modern equivalent of guards isn't men with guns but lawyers, accountants, and cybersecurity experts who protect your digital identity and financial infrastructure. These defenses work better when nobody knows where you are or what you own. The phenomenon of so-called shadow billionaires illustrates this trend taken to its extreme. These individuals have structured their affairs so completely through offshore trusts, holding companies, and complex legal arrangements that their names appear on no public lists of the wealthy. They own no property directly. They move through the world, leaving no digital footprint. They are in essence invisible emperors, exercising vast economic power while maintaining complete anonymity. This represents the complete opposite of the Versailles model, where Louis needed everyone to see and acknowledge his power. Shadow billionaires achieve power precisely through being unseen. Consider the fate of existing palaces. Many have become museums, hotels, or government buildings. The British royal family still occupies some historic palaces, but largely as figureheads, their power ceremonial rather than real. The maintenance costs for these structures are often borne by governments or funded by tourism rather than personal wealth. This fate would likely await any new palace. The structure would be worth more as a tourist attraction than as a residence, because the value proposition of a palace, impressing others with your power and wealth, no longer works in a world where such displays inspire resentment rather than awe. The environmental dimension cannot be ignored. Climate change and environmental consciousness have made obvious waste increasingly unacceptable. A palace requires enormous energy to heat, cool, and maintain. The water needed for elaborate gardens in drought-prone areas draws criticism. The construction itself, consuming vast quantities of materials and producing enormous amounts of waste, faces opposition from environmental activists. Billionaires already face criticism for their carbon footprints, particularly from private jet travel. Building a palace would multiply that criticism while offering no real benefit over more modest properties. The legal and regulatory environment has also shifted decisively against palace construction. Zoning laws, building codes, environmental regulations, and historical preservation rules make building large structures difficult in most desirable locations. The weeks or months of reviews and approvals required would expose the project to public scrutiny and potential opposition. Compare this to Louis XIV, who was the law and could simply decree that Versailles would be built. Modern billionaires, regardless of their wealth, must navigate complex legal systems and face potential challenges from neighbors, environmental groups, and local governments. The path of least resistance is to buy existing large properties or build multiple smaller ones. The generational shift in wealth accumulation plays a role too. Historical aristocrats inherited their positions and wealth, expecting their children and grandchildren to do the same. Building a palace made sense if you expected your family to occupy it for centuries. Most modern billionaires made their fortunes in a single generation through business ventures that may or may not outlast them. They understand that wealth can evaporate as quickly as it accumulated. Building a permanent monument to temporary success seems foolish when that money could be deployed more flexibly. Why build for eternity when eternity is unlikely? The few modern structures that do approach palace scale tend to be corporate headquarters or hotels rather than private residences. Apple's headquarters, the massive ring-shaped structure in Cupertino, cost $5 billion and contains 12,000 employees. It's arguably more impressive than Versailles in both scale and ambition. But it's a workspace, not a home, and the prestige accrues to the company rather than an individual. This represents a fundamental shift in how power is exercised in the modern world, through institutions rather than personal charisma. The ultra-wealthy have also discovered that true luxury in the modern age means access rather than ownership. Why own a palace when you can rent the most expensive hotel suites in the world for a few weeks a year? Why maintain a massive estate in the Caribbean when you can rent a private island when you want one? The rise of luxury rental markets, ultra-high-end concierge services, and fractional ownership schemes allows billionaires to enjoy palace-level amenities without the costs and liabilities of ownership. This reflects a broader shift in how wealth operates, from accumulation of assets to accumulation of options. As we enter the third decade of the 21st century, the distance between modern billionaire residences and historic palaces continues to grow. While tech founders buy modest homes in Palo Alto, hedge fund managers maintain apartments in anonymous towers, and even those with multiple properties avoid anything approaching the scale or ostentation of Versailles. The question isn't really why billionaires stopped building palaces. It's why anyone thought they might continue doing so in a world that has fundamentally rejected the philosophy palaces represented. Palaces were monuments to hierarchy, permanence, and the divine right of kings. They announced that some humans were fundamentally superior to others and deserved to live in luxury while others served them. They were designed to last for centuries, physical manifestations of eternal power. Modern society, despite all its inequalities and injustices, has at least nominally rejected these ideas. Democracy, however imperfect, suggests that all humans are equal. Markets, however rigged, suggest that wealth must be earned rather than inherited. Technology suggests that change is constant and nothing lasts forever. Billionaires stopped building palaces because palaces are artifacts of a dying worldview. In their place, they've built something perhaps more insidious, a global infrastructure of financial opacity, legal complexity, and deliberate invisibility that allows them to enjoy unprecedented wealth while avoiding the accountability that visible palaces invited. They learned from history that showing off gets you beheaded. They learned that in the modern world, the ultimate status symbol isn't a building everyone can see, but a life nobody can track. They discovered that true power in the 21st century means being able to be anywhere while being found nowhere. The Palace of Versailles stands today as a museum, visited by millions who gawk at its excess and photograph its hall of mirrors. It's a monument to a dead king and a dead philosophy. Modern billionaires are building their own monuments, but these monuments are invisible, scattered, and impossible to photograph. They're built not from marble and gold, but from trusts, corporations, and encrypted communications. They're designed not to last for centuries, but to adapt instantly to changing circumstances. They don't announce their owner's power to the world. They hide it behind layers of complexity so thick that most people don't realize the power exists. That's why billionaires stopped building palaces like Versailles. They found something better, something safer, something that allows them to have all the luxury with none of the risk. And unlike a palace, which can be stormed by an angry mob demanding bread, this new infrastructure is nearly impossible to attack because nobody quite knows where it is or how it works. The age of palaces is over. The age of invisible empires has begun. If you found this story fascinating, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share this with anyone interested in how wealth and power really operate in the modern world. Until next time, keep questioning what you see, and more importantly, what you don't see.